Hey Patty, just like we conferenced last time, I'm going to give you some feedback about your formatting of your paper and also read it aloud to you. That way you can follow along and make changes as you go. I'll also annotate my reading. That way you can hear my feedback as far as suggestions or alterations that I think that you might need to make within your writing, okay? So the first thing I notice is that up at the top of the screen where your page numbers are, you need to incorporate your last name. That way the header is accurate. So it should say Browning and then number 1. The second thing is in your heading itself, the date should actually be 12 and then spell out the month January 2018 to meet with MLA guidelines. Okay, so here we go. Paragraph 1. If we were to look back at history, we would see that the base of what completely developed our modern world. In regards to the 20th century, a lot has happened during that era. All right, what era are you talking about? Are you talking about the era that led up to the 20th century or talking about the 20th century itself? It was the final century of the second millennium. During this century, there were a vast variety of events revolving around America and even the entire world. However, not all events were smooth and beautiful. When the Nazi Party began over in Germany in 1920, almost 2 years after the end of World War I, things began to take a different turn. During this time was the evil Adolf Hitler's rise to power, and thus a lot of problems began to become forged. As problems continued to thrive, a tragic event began on September 1st, 1939. As soon as Germany invaded Poland, Britain and Europe declared war on Germany. All right, so I see that you are referencing HistoryNet, but if you are referencing an entire article, then you should at least have the article or the page name and not just like the website name, okay? All right, carrying on. It was the beginning of World War II. World War II was a very important event that should never be forgotten. There's a saying spoken by a philosopher named George Santayana: those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Despite this quote not having any relevance with World War II, Santana lends citizens who have heard the saying the thought of not forgetting the history we learn of, otherwise we will face the consequences. In any case, World War II is relevant to learn about. Okay, my first question is why? So you talk about, the first thing I want you to look at is go through these sentences and see which sentences you can combine. For example, there are a lot of very general comments in the beginning of this paragraph where you say a lot has happened during this era. There were a vast variety of events. Like, this is a little redundant. It's better for you to have fewer sentences that are very specific than multiple sentences that repeat vague comments. It seems like you are talking about the World War II relevance to modern society. However, you sort of, where is it? You're talking about the end of World War I beginning to take a different turn. I think what you need to do in this first paragraph is explain to us why World War II is so relevant. So the last sentence you have here, in any case, World War II is relevant to learn about. That is only the start of a thesis statement. Your thesis statement should have that, but also explain why it's relevant, and that's what we're missing out of this first paragraph. Okay, so now I'm going to go to page 2. When World War I came to an end, the outcome of a heavy loss fell onto Germany. Germany, once a powerful nation, came crumbling down. The economy was shattered, and the nation was forced to give up land due to the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, the treaty that ended World War I. But as Germany was left economically unstable, a small organization rose from the ashes of despair and sought reformation to bring Germany back to its senses. This small organization was known as the German Workers' Party. And then you have a citation here, but that citation should not be in the middle of the sentence. A citation should be down here at the end of the sentence after you say party. So to finish that sentence, you say, which would soon be later called the Nazi Party. Army veteran Adolf Hitler also took part in the small organization before he was assigned leader of the party. Originally led by locksmith Anton Drexler and reporter Karl Herren, the German Workers' Party focused on promoting German nationalism and anti-Semitism. All right, my second question about this citation is that typically the author's last name is not staff. That represents an organization. And so if the if your citation starts with the word staff, then usually if it's representative of a larger organization, you would put the actual organization's name within the citation, okay? The party also thought the Treaty of Versailles was immensely unjust to Germany due to the burden it placed on the nation. During the early days of the German Workers' Party, Hitler's progress on rising to power began to grow. Hitler, an army veteran, evolved into a public speaker who attracted new members into the organization. He gave speeches about how Jews and Marxists were the core of Germany's problems. This hatred towards Jews and the murderous government policies which stemmed from that hatred would soon become more central to the party. On July 1921, Hitler took up the mantle and assumed leadership of the organization. By that time, it was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, more commonly known as the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party is a key figure to look at before, during, and after. All right, you need a comma after during. The time of World War II, because the Nazis are one of the roots that stems around the significance of that era. Throughout the 1920s, Hitler continuously gave speech after speech about how revolution in German life can revive the economy and lift a vast majority of problems resting in Germany. How can these problems be solved? Hitler explained if communists and Jews were driven out of the nation, problems would most definitely be solved. His speeches sent a ray of hope into the Nazi Party and even to the economically disadvantaged Germans. In 1923, the Nazi Party was banned because of Hitler's failure on Beer Hall Putsch, his attempt to seize control over the German government. However, the ban only lasted until 1925 because the Nazi Party was discovered yet again. Soon enough, Hitler and the Nazis began rising into power at an extraordinary rate. When Germany entered a state of economic depression in 1929, the Nazis criticized the ruling government as capitalizing the situation. Due to the Nazis' actions, they began winning elections at a stunning rate. In January 1933, Hitler became the German chancellor, and his Nazi government seized control over all German life. Okay, my question here is, you say due to the Nazis' actions, they began winning elections at a stunning rate, but you don't actually say what the rate is, so this part needs clarified or expanded upon. The other thing is you have an extra space in between these two paragraphs. I'm sorry that the right click keeps coming up, but this is extra space, so this needs to be deleted. All right, during the time of the Nazi Party's build-up, racial beliefs also built up. From Hitler's speeches, he spread beliefs about racial purity and the superiority of the German race. This is what Hitler called an Aryan master race. I think that you need to do some editing there because that doesn't make sense. What Hitler spoke about is the Aryan race must remain pure in order to succeed in world domination. In other words, these beliefs could very likely be the source as to why Nazis thought they were superior to all human beings. Why did they target Jews? Somehow the Jews were in the way of the Nazis and were considered as a chief enemy. According to the Nazis, Jews set a goal to prevent the construction of the national community, which the Nazis were currently striving for. Before Hitler became chancellor, he formulated a plan to exterminate the Jews from Germany. Once he did become chancellor, the plan was set into motion. Acts of genocide were taking place and Jews were targeted immediately. This was the beginning of one of the most terrifying events of the 20th century, the Holocaust. The Holocaust was detrimental enough to even have a spot on the calendar, stated to be called the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, held on January 27th each year. Between 1933 and 1934, Jews were wiped out completely from German public life. Between 1935 through 1937, further measures trifled over previous methods of extermination. Jews lost their citizenship, and towards the end of 1937, Jews were denied any means of receiving an independent living. On November 9th and 10th, 1938, Nazi brutality was so strong it smashed through the doors and windows of almost every remaining Jewish home and business in Germany. This is also known as the Night of Broken Glass. My question here is that some of these sentences sound very different from how you typically write. So if you are pulling direct quotes from this Merriam source, then you need to make sure that they are actually in quotation marks. The methods of Nazis used to wipe out Jews were deadly, but none of these methods could compare to what occurred in the concentration camps. Concentration camps were also called death camps, and known camps are Majdanek, Buchenwald, and most importantly, Auschwitz. What purpose do concentration camps serve? Jews were captured and sent to these sites and were forced to do labor work, but that was not the main reason. Jews were sent there to be murdered. Not only Jews were captured, gypsies and other criminals were placed in concentration camps due to the Nazis' racial ideology. Every day was murder and brutality in the camps, and the workers were barely treated to a healthy lifestyle. Due to the lack of care given to the workers, they would starve to death or die during labor work. If they weren't working, they would get killed on the spot or be sent, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so my question at this point is that this is essentially just a summary of World War II. You're not making the argument as far as how this is relevant to modern society or why we need to learn about World War II. What you have here is instead more of a report and less of an argument. While it's important to sometimes summarize some things that have happened, keep in mind that your goal, if I go back up to the first page, you're trying to prove that World War II is relevant to learn about, but you're only giving me statistics and information and not actually explaining why we need to learn about. And that's something that you need to edit out some of this summary and instead explain to me why it's important to learn about. So if I go into your concluding paragraph, after all the tension in World War II brought upon the globe, it came to an end when the Allies were proclaimed victorious. Okay, so now you're telling me how it ends. And if I go to the very last sentence, or last two sentences, it says the events that build up to World War II make the entirety of before, during, and after the war relevant to learn about. But you never explain why it's relevant. Why should we care about this in 2017? Yes, it was tragic and it's a terrible event, but if I'm a teenager sitting in this classroom and you're giving this presentation, you're not providing me anything outside of what I've already learned about in my history classes, and that's something that you need to think about, okay? When I look at your works cited page, you have some work that you need to do here because these are not in alphabetical order. Additionally, like I commented before, some of your citations, like Merriam, for example, you have that in parentheses, but I don't see a citation that actually begins with Merriam. Your in-text citation should start with the first word of your citation. So if you pulled, like where you have the citation in the middle of your paper that says staff, I have no idea which of these sources you're actually linking it to, okay? So you need to also go back and fix your in-text citations in addition to fixing your works cited page. The last thing is that this should be a page unto itself and not share a page with your actual essay. So you want to make sure that you bump it to another page and that where it literally says works cited, that's not bold and it's the same size as the rest of your paper, which should be 12 point Times New Roman, okay? So I hope this feedback helps you. Please let me know if you have any questions. You have some work to do, but I'm happy to help you get this paper in shape, so let me know what you need.